Hello friends, welcome to Air Supply, a podcast from JO Collective. My name is Joshua O'Connor. My guest this week is Lindsley Ruth, the co-founder of Dionomi Partners and the former CEO of the RS Group, a multinational distributor of industrial and electrical products. During his tenure as CEO, he turned around the fortunes of the company, driving substantial growth and increasing the share price from approximately £1.80 to over £13, taking it from the FTSE 250 into the FTSE 100. His insights highlighted the critical interplay between operational expertise, cultural sensitivity, and personal well-being in effective leadership. He stressed that genuine transformation of a company demands a hands-on approach where leaders deeply understand the business and adapt to diverse cultures, recognizing that cultural change is a gradual process built on empathy and engagement. He further emphasized the inseparable link between performance and morale, acknowledging the personal sacrifices inherent in leadership roles and therefore the paramount importance of maintaining balance and prioritizing health. I hope you enjoy.
I grew up in Tennessee. I had a father that was with Eastman Kodak, and he had spent most of his career in sales. I had a grandfather that was in the distribution industry. So I grew up around sales and the selling process. And then my grandfather had a distribution company in the Southeast, and he had it for many, many years. And so I grew up working around that type of environment. And A&M had an industrial distribution program, very unique program where you can actually learn about the distribution industry, very hands-on experience, and the world's largest program. My father had gone to Texas A&M. So I actually went from Tennessee to Texas A&M with the intent of majoring in industrial distribution. So that's how I got into this business, and I've been in it for more than 40 years. And, it sounds like a long time. But yet some people, and you'll find, I think, in business, some people could have 40 years of experience, but it's 1 year lived 40 times over and over. I've been blessed to have had decades of great experience and different opportunities. And so I've learned a lot. And that's given me the opportunity now in this particular space of distribution, business services, to be able to take everything I've learned and share it with others.
So you're sitting in late 2014 in Quebec in Canada, having a very high profile senior role in future electronics, and you get a call saying, "Can you come and be CEO of Electro Components, a business based in London?" The business, as far as I can recall, had historically had a very British flavour. Ian Mason, who's unfortunately now passed away, was the CEO, and he'd been CEO and then COO, I think, in the business for a couple of decades. So you were also taking over from someone who had been there for an awfully long time. So a new person to the company, not someone promoted internally, and an American living in Canada, moving to the UK. What was that like?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I have the utmost respect for Ian Mason and what he did for Electric Components in his career, and it's unfortunate that he's no longer with us. But I think the last thing you ever want to do is ever criticize your predecessor, and I've been very careful in my time with Electros, with the RS Group, never to do that. And I will say that, there might have been a lot of things that he got wrong, but the one thing he got right, which was a significant piece of the equation, was digital, moving RS to the web. The first time was actually in 1995 when RS moved to the web, the first website of a distributor in the United Kingdom. And give credit to Ian Mason for that decision, his commitment to digital. RS wouldn't be the company it is today if it wasn't for Ian Mason. So having said that, Ian was a business development leader He wasn't his knowledge of the business. He'd been there a long time, but maybe his hands-on knowledge of the business wasn't maybe as strong as others. And I would say that when I walked in to the company, it was very much an organization that had transformed to be internally focused, that was more that was less employee centric, less customer focused, more bureaucratic, and a bit consulting led in its approach. And I think ultimately that gets back to leadership. But I think that the company had lost its way, and it was my role and responsibility to find it again and to kind of ignite that fire, bring passion back to business, build a plan, and then get the growth engine going again, profitable growth engine going.
How long did that take?
Well, there's there's an impact you can have as a CEO on day one. So there are things you can do, and they're the kind of the immediate decisions that you want to make that have an impact, and then you've got to build a plan. And so I would say it depends on what aspect of the business in terms of the transformation. And so make it clear, just to make it clear, what I went into is a transformational situation. I had a board, I had a chair that absolutely knew the business, understood what needed to be done. So we were 100% completely aligned, which is critical. You always want to be aligned with your chair, with the board. I can't say enough things about that board that I had when I first started, and the chair. So they knew exactly what needed to be done. And they took a chance on the first American CEO in the company's history to come in and be bold and direct, and to put in place a transformational plan. So what I realized, and the question that we ultimately had to answer was, were we a UK company with international operations, or were we an international company that happened to be headquartered in the UK? Now, the clear answer was, to be successful in 32 countries around the world, you got to be an international company that just happens to be headquartered in the UK. Can't take what works in the UK and go and copy and paste it around the world and think it's going to work. You have different cultures, you have different ways of doing business, et cetera. So you've got to have the flexibility in your model to give some level of autonomy to countries around the world while you have some guidelines, et cetera. So we ask, how long did it take? Well, it depends on the particular aspect of the business. But I would say that, there's some things that you can do day one, and there are other things that may take a few months. And then there's some things that take a few years. What I underestimated was the time it would take to transform the culture. That was probably my biggest underestimate when I went in. And I would say that took a minimum of 2 years, but ultimately 3 years to transform the culture.
And how unique are businesses like the RS Group in terms of changing that culture? Because it's a business which employs the highly technical, highly skilled people who understand their customers, subject matter experts, etc. It's a highly sales, client, customer facing business. It's international, but then also you have depots on the ground throughout 34 countries where people are actually running their own business and having relationships with their own customers that are unique to that area in that specific country. And so actually accessing those people and changing the culture must be incredibly difficult.
So first of all, it's not about what you say, right? It's about how you make people feel. And that's ultimately how you change culture. I always say, you can read all the reports you want, and you can put out all the surveys you want. You really won't know the true culture of a company until you actually go and visit facilities. You walk around, you get a feel for it, you talk to people, you interface, you observe, and then you get a good understanding of what the culture is like. So you can't do that through just talking to a few people on the phone or looking at survey results, et cetera. Now, you can use surveys to measure progress once you really understand the culture, for sure. And I always get more. I got more out of comments than the numbers themselves. So reading every single comment on a survey to me was really important. But when you have that level of complexity, you have to be able to get out on the ground and really understand the dynamics of the organization, understand the people, understand the challenges and the obstacles they face, and walk in their shoes. To do that, there's always been this debate in distribution. There's really been no debate, but do you need expertise in this business? So, can you come in from the outside, not know anything about the business, and have never worked in a distribution organization? Or I say worked. I'm talking about physically worked in the business, not being on a board, et cetera. I've been on boards, and I can tell you that doesn't do it, unfortunately. But actually, been physically walked in the shoes to understand this business. So, have you been in a selling part of an organization? Have you been on the buying part? Do you know how IT works and logistics and all of that? It's really important. Why is that important? Because if you want to go through a transformation, you got to be able to understand what good looks like. And it starts with knowing what good looks like. So when you go to a country and you see they're struggling with their sales organization and sales effectiveness, you need to know, what does good look like, right? You can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to go hire somebody and they know what good looks like." How do you even know if they do? Right. So you got to be able to know and to be able to go in and really understand, right? What are the obstacles they face? What are they missing? And you got to lead by example. So you got to show and teach and train and coach. And that's what I did across the board in the organization. Now, that eventually takes its toll on your health. You got to learn how to be able to get in and do that and step out, right? But when you go through that type of transformation, you really got to be hands-on in that approach, right? So as I said, I underestimated the time it would take, right? And it's not about how long it takes to go visit all the locations and talk to people, but getting them to buy in and believe, right? Because the older I get, the more I believe in what people do as opposed to what they say. So you can say all you want, you put out all the LinkedIn posts you want, you can do all the videos and all that crap. And you know what? Great. You really should shut your mouth until you perform and then you put out whatever you want, right? But that's what you got to do. And that's what I did. I didn't do any of that stuff. And you got to get people to actually believe. They got to see, like, you say, "Hey, I don't care how small we are in Germany. I really believe we can grow, and here's why. And I've worked here where we did this, et cetera. But let me show you. Let's go visit customers. Let's go meet with the supplier because here's the art of the possible." They may not, they may listen to you and say, "Okay, that sounds great." You may go with them, but you got to follow up and you can teach people certain things and strategies, but until they see the results and the numbers come along and the performance shows and they get rewarded for that, they don't necessarily buy in. So that took a while to translate the vision I had into the results and then have people buy in, like, "Hey, we can do great things. We can achieve things. Oh, by the way, our LTIPs actually will pay off sometimes."
Mm. Yes, I was going to I was going to ask kind of what it is that makes people buy in, but I think you alluded to it, that it's a combination of demonstrating success plus people feeling like there's something in it for them as well.
And it can't be top down, Josh, right? I mean,
Mm.
right? It's not about what I say, right? That, here's a vision. Let's figure out how we're going to go do this. And here's some guidelines, et cetera. They buy in when they know they can participate. When people buy in, right? And when you actually
Mm.
say, "Look, you know, I've got this chart I've always used," right? And you say, what ultimately you want to do is you want to have a high performance, high morale organization. But if you
Mm.
have high performance, low morale, what's the result? Well, you end up having typically a lot of turnover, a sweatshop, right? So you see that in a lot of call centers where, yeah, the numbers look good, but there's high turnover because you burn people out, unfortunately.
Mm.
You might
Mm.
have an organization where you have high morale, low performance. I call that the country club environment, right?
Right.
Where
Yeah.
everybody feels good, but the numbers aren't great. You say, "Well, it's a great culture." Well, okay, maybe they feel good, but they won't be in business long, right?
Mm.
Or the CEO won't be there long if the performance isn't there, right? And then you have organizations that might have low morale, which typically will lead to low performance, and those businesses tend to go out of business. And so, how do you get to high performance, high morale. I used to call that the first choice zone, still do. And ultimately, that's where you want to be. So how do you keep the focus where you're putting kind of pressure on the organization not to become complacent and constantly focus on not making excuses, but taking market share profitably? And how do you do that out there while you're keeping people motivated, you keep morale high? So that's kind of the secret formula that you gotta build to, or the result of that formula.
And so you took the company from $100 million in profit to 500 million. The share price increase under your tenure was 500%. So you took it into the FTSE 100 for the first time. Incredible achievement. Was the success of your success of RS, was it incremental, or was there a time where you were pushing through changes, you were working with people, you were trying to transform the business? It wasn't necessarily showing on the bottom line, but then suddenly it all clicked and things started moving.
Yeah, so I think the first 2 years was incremental, and then there was a step change. There was
Mm.
we went from being average to good. So there was, people used to say, "Oh, the companies the first 2 years are like, how performance is great, share price is coming up," and they would say, "Congratulations, you're doing really well." And I used to say, "It's not that we're doing that. It's not that we're great or we're good. It's just that we were that bad before." Right? So we're doing better. So to your point, there was incremental improvement. I think when you're going and you're trying to change a whole lot of things at once, right? Which is typically not recommended, but you have to sometimes in situations, right? Where you're operating on a necessity where people, investors aren't happy, suppliers aren't happy, customers aren't happy. Right? That's not exactly the situation you want to be in. So you got to look at how do we become more efficient, take cost out, how do you grow the top line profitably, and how do you improve the culture? And doing all those things at once is very, very difficult. And I would argue that you could never do that unless you know the business, you understand the business, and you walk in the shoes of your team, your people, and you have a very clear vision and you know how to articulate that vision. And we'll get into leadership, I'm sure, but I think three dimensions of operational, organizational, and strategic leadership are really important in this case. But I think we went through this period, Josh, of 2 years of kind of incremental improvement, changing all those things, and then we kind of had the breakthrough and step function, and that was the point at which, whether it was 2 or 3 years, where people believed and where we transformed Asia from losing 20% to making nearly 20% operating profit, and where we then accelerated our growth in the Americas, and we got Europe back on track, and we got our private label business going, and we started adding suppliers, and so everything started to gel, and we began to accelerate. And so we went through this first period. I think there were kind of three phases of the company that we went through over the nearly 8 years I was there. What the first phase was really one of which we had to get the basics right. So I would say it was to do the basics brilliantly. So how do you get the customer back in the heart of what you do? How do you drive accountability back into the business, and how do you operate for less? So that was a kind of a share price gain of £1.80 to, let's call it 3, 4. And then there was that phase of, okay, let's accelerate performance now. We fixed the house. We've earned the right to begin to look at inorganic expansion. So kind of that second phase of, okay, now let's build this model and let's start looking 5 years out. So let's build a plan around destination 2025, and let's really get all the elements of our strategy in place. So it's kind of like you go out and you take over a Premier League team at the bottom of the table, right? And you say, "Okay, how do we get to the top of the table?" Right? And you want to go out and, as you know, from the industry that you've been in on the search side, that there's a limitation of what you can do with talent, right? So there's a playbook you want to put in, but you're limited on what you can do. And you got to make sure you have the right talent. So you're building that talent while you're putting in a playbook with the goal of getting to the top of the table. So you got to do that in phases. All right. So that phase one was really, let's get the right leaders on the pitch, and let's make sure we've got A players where we need A players, which that's always going to be a moving kind of dynamic and target. And then let's look at how we accelerate things once we get there. So incremental improvement, step function, got the right leaders, accelerate things, and then you begin to look at, okay, now what is the next phase? Because it's easy to begin to believe your own press clippings and think we're good, and become complacent. So then how do you kick it into the next year? So that's really the journey that we went through. And then that was, getting the stock from 1 to 3.4 was the first phase, and then to 7 or 8, and then to 13 or 12.78 and sterling. And that was really kind of what we went through in 3 phases, and during those 8 years.
I mean, it sounds like you were running a marathon while sprinting for several years. Tell me about the impact that it had on you and your health.
When I first started, I made the first 6 months, there wasn't a day that I didn't work, right? And they were early mornings to late at night. I lived in a town just outside of Oxford, and in the countryside, near Bicester, and I did not have any reception at my old barn conversion. I had no telly, no satellite, so it was just myself and the cows next door, that I could see out the window. So there were a lot of late nights of just reading and learning the background of the company and working on strategy and looking at numbers and building the infrastructure required to accelerate the growth of the company. And so that was nonstop. And then moving the headquarters from Oxford to London then took it to a different level. So I would say this, the toll that to be in a high performance type role and have high expectations of yourself requires you to be very intentional about your balance. And
Mm.
so for me, the older you get, the tougher it becomes, your physical side, and the older you get, the greater the impact of the hours you work on your body. So I didn't pay a lot of attention to that. When I started as CEO, I was 44 years old. I felt great, and the harder I worked and the better the company did, it seemed like the greater the deterioration of my own health. And that was the sacrifice that I made.
How much of the impact that it had on you was due to uh, how your personality and your brain and your, I guess, the your nature, which means you just really really want to succeed at all costs.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I wouldn't say succeed at all costs. When you're competitive, you want to win. And so you've got to learn how to shut down. So, there was a period of 5, 6 years that I went through where you could reach me on Saturday night at 11 p.m. If you called me, I'd answer, I'd respond, I would engage. And so the lessons you learn, when you're the CEO, you gotta build balance into your schedule, and you gotta look at, when you do burn out, you gotta be able to reset, recharge, and you gotta know what to do. And so, one of the loneliest jobs in the world is to be CEO. You got to be careful what you
Mm.
say at all times. You don't have a lot of people to talk to. So it's really important to have a strong coach and a good sounding board that you can talk to as you go through things.
And when did you realize that you need a strong coach, you need people to talk to? How long
Well,
was
I
your
think
tenure
you
as
want.
CEO?
So I think there's when do you realize you got to talk to someone? When you have a strong chair, they're always encouraging you to do that. Now, whether you listen or not is a different thing. And so
Mm.
think as you go through this process, first of all, things have changed a lot post COVID and through COVID with people talking more about challenges. I get a lot of phone calls from friends that are CEOs that don't necessarily want to talk to their chair or their board about challenges they have physically, and because they see it as a sign of weakness. And I think that still exists somewhat. But if you're really struggling physically or you have heart problems, kind of health issue, you should feel comfortable talking about it. You need to go address those things. So I'm really big on that front. But when you're in the role as CEO, going through transformation, you got to learn when to say no. So, you're typically going to be invited to a lot of dinners. There's always going to be a lot of lunches. I When we moved the office to London, I was attempting to move away from sandwiches and have more salads and lunches for board meetings and have meetings in the office,
Mm.
and the sausage rolls in the morning. And so try to have more of a healthier cuisine, earlier dinners, et cetera. But the reality is you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well, you often don't have time for exercise, you're not spending enough time on yourself. You got to be intentional about that. So
Mm.
that lesson that took me a long time to learn personally. And going through COVID took a real toll on my health. I had some issues just in terms of my immunity, but um, my father died of COVID. I picked up COVID 3 times, and it takes its toll on you when you suffer. And I do, long COVID's definitely a thing, and you know, um, you've got to make sure you take care of your health. And I didn't do that at the time, but that's one of the lessons you learn in life is you learn from your mistakes and you make sure that you address it so that you're in better health.
I'm very sorry to hear about your father. How how long did it take for you to recover?
About a year, so literally a year. So there are when you're out of shape, and you need to get back into shape, and you're going through a kind of a physical transformation. It really helps when you start hitting the gym every day, and you reset kind of your health. And so, without getting to too many details, I just say, I would say a year. And today I feel like I'm in my 20s again. It's you have to be intentional though. You have to have balance. You have to know what to do. You have to know when to say no. Um, that comes wisdom comes with age at times, and not always, but experience. And oftentimes, you learn a lot from your failures. Equally, you can learn from your successes. And so, I've been very fortunate to have both and learn from them. So that's helped me.
So how much has that experience influenced you as a leader?
I think it's made me more empathetic. So I can understand what people go through when someone loses a family member, for health reasons, when someone goes through something themselves. And I can definitely understand and identify, when you're living in another country, your family's in another country, and you want to come back, and yet, you feel obligated not to, to be there for a role. That can be a challenge. So there's lots of things now that I have a greater appreciation for. And ultimately, yeah, I would always tell our employees my number one priority was their health and safety. And those weren't just words. I truly believed it then, and I believe it even more now. And I'll say this because a lot of people pointed this out to me. They said, "You're so concerned about our health and safety, but you're not concerned about your own." And that was true.
Mm.
And so you go through a process and a period where you realize that if you're not healthy, you can't be as effective for others.
About a year ago, I had a period of ill health and feeling a bit burnt out myself, and I was in pretty bad shape. I hadn't really looked after myself for a couple of years, and um, yeah, well, I think my two reflections on what I was thinking then was almost that there's this kind of strange badge of honor, um, of like, oh, you're working really hard, so and you're feeling bad. That means you must be doing the right thing. You'll start feeling better once you start feeling the getting the rewards of working hard, whatever that may be. Um, and also until you do it, until you have someone who says, actually, you know what, looking after yourself actually makes you feel really good. It's hard to accept maybe that you're not looking after yourself. So I completely understand what you mean about exercising and about trying to find balance in your life. Not only does it make you feel less bad, you start to realize how good you can feel. Um, Whereas I think I hadn't felt good for a few years, and I just got used to that level of not really functioning physically very well.
Well, and that's and you described kind of the way I felt. You get used to that feeling, and
Mm,
badge of honor. You feel you're invincible. You think I'm not going to worry about this. You kick the can down the road. You're gaining a little bit of weight. You go from you add a stone or two, and you think where you wake up one day and realize, like, wait, where did all that come from? And you know, uh, but look. Um, when you um so much of this is down to building a process for how you do things, right? How you manage your time, or how do you build a high performance mentality? Yeah, how do you plan? How do you organize your schedule? How do you keep it focused? And there's always going to be distractions that are going to come up. And the lesson I would take away from my experience is um, don't work with people that you don't like working with, right? So if the situation's changed and there are people that you don't want to work with, don't do it, right? So you can control your environment, you can control the things that are within your control. And I think that when you let things kind of get to you, um, then stress builds, right? You don't have the energy to take care of your health, and you're not thinking about those things. And this badge of honor, as you say, you think, well, I can keep going, but physically, your body will start to give out on you. And I think one of the lessons that I learned, Josh, was you know first 5 years, I was very hands-on in the CEO role. So people came to me. So I was playing a CEO role, a COO role, president of regions, and all kinds of different functions. Head of procurement, head of sales, you name it. The challenge with that is when you step out of it, all right. And you say, okay, I'm now going to coach others and I'm going to multiply my impact through others, which is the right thing to do. There people might say, oh, well, he's not as engaged. She's not as engaged as she once was. Right. And so that's a challenge when you have the wrong people, that are involved at times. And you got to make sure you're aligned and that people understand why you're doing what you're doing. And I think that's a challenge. You've that you people often have lofty expectations of a CEO to try and do everything. It just depends on the situation, but for me, being able to disconnect from the business, multiply my impact through others, manage a balance and how to do things. Was something that you can't teach, you don't read in a book. You've got to learn, you got to experience, you've got to have a great coach to work through those things. And it takes a while. It's kind of like the Matrix. It takes a while, but once you kind of figure it out, you see it and it becomes clear.
mm. Yes, interesting. And how did you find the right coach, the right mentor, sounding board for you?
So by far, and I've had a lot of coaches, a lot of mentors. I would say first of all, Peter Johnson, who was my initial chair, even to this day, is a great mentor, great friend, and I may not always agree with what he has to say, but I can't ever disagree with the logic behind what he says, and so he's and oftentimes I might disagree, and it turns out he's right in terms of his opinion or what his thoughts were. We had the best coach that I have had was a gentleman by the name of Scott Pelton, and he's a high performance coach. He's got a company called Tignum. He's out of Arizona, and one of our board members had him as a coach at Novartis, and he was also a coach for other CEOs in the industry, Fortune 500 CEOs as well. And I found him to be quite remarkable in terms of how do you build a high performance mindset? How do you take care of yourself? Little tips in terms of how do you travel? How do you deal with jet lag? How do you build habits? And he by far was the most effective coach for me. Like any coach, it all depends on how you get on with them, right? And how you interface with that individual. But it's always incumbent upon you to take action and to own your own journey and your schedule, et cetera. So you've got to be self motivated. You got to commit. A coach can only do part of it and not living your life.
And how much do you think your your time as a leader, as CEO of RS, and then before that as well, is shaped by your background? You mentioned that your father and grandfather were in business, and you followed in your grandfather's. Was it your grandfather's footsteps? You followed
Yes,
in
yes, in the
distribution.
distribution, but then Paul Andrews and Craig Conrad, Mike Warden at TTI, and and Don Rice, Preston College, who's 88 years old, and I still talk to him every month. And yeah,
Mm,
I've been blessed with having absolutely phenomenal mentors in my life, which I still talk with them, and I've kept in touch with people throughout my career, and I think that ultimately, um, the values that I have been shaped by, again, seeing what good looks like, knowing the right thing to do when nobody's looking, being able to always treat people with respect. We had an amazing leaders framework that we had developed, and we said that people follow leaders that have passion, that they trust, and that have humility. And I've been very fortunate to be around some amazing leaders myself that I've learned from, and to be able to build trust with people, you got to be honest, got to be direct, and you've got to be very honest with people, and they got to feel very confident that you are going to be there. You're going to listen to them. You're not playing political games. You're not a schemer or any of that stuff. And I drive politics and business drive me insane, and that's people that do what's in their own self-interest, but not necessarily in the best interest of the corporation. There are a lot of politicians out there. So, to me, living your values and what you believe, and not just some chart you throw on the wall and you say, oh, you're my values, but it's actually living it and being true to who you are and knowing who you are, I think is critical.
mm. I think one thing that in Europe well, actually, I think more in the UK, we see ourselves as being uh, quite closely connected to you guys in the States. I know that, well, I don't think it's felt so much anymore by the US, but we think of ourselves as having a special relationship, and we speak the same language, and we have a cooperation in many aspects of government and defense and all of that kind of thing. I've done a little bit of work in the US, and my reflection when coming home on the plane has been that whilst we speak the same language, we are fundamentally actually quite different, or we're much less similar than we think. And that's just an observation. That's not saying that and that's positive or negative or whatever. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how Europe is different to the US in terms of business and crucially leadership as well.
Okay, I think first of all, I'll say that I've got an appreciation for cultures around the world. So there are lots of different cultures within Europe, but globally, you know, um, I find I just love spending time with people. So I find different cultures quite intriguing. I think oftentimes leaders try to fit people to their culture as opposed to adapting to their culture, right? And I think wherever you go, you really need to respect and appreciate the culture where you go, right? And what I mean by that, of course, is within what we would consider to be ethical boundaries and things, things that you would human rights violations are unacceptable, things of that nature, right? So respecting culture and customs and how people do things, and knowing, the appropriate ways of introducing yourself in countries like Japan and other places. And so I think that's very important to respect countries. Um, I think Europe, first of all, I love living in Europe. I love living in London. I think London's, to me, it's my favorite city in the world. I love the people. I Somebody asked me 2 years ago. Somebody asked if I would go back. I said no. But if you asked me today, I'd say yes. I
Mm.
really enjoyed living there. I know, you might be a bit pessimistic and people are on the outlook, but I think Europeans are resilient, and I believe in the future of Europe. I believe in the future of the UK because there's some brilliant people that are there. What I dislike about Europe in general is regulatory systems, the government interfering in business, all kind of the infighting that takes place within governments. And so I find Europe to be less pro business than it was historically. And I think that's a challenge because ultimately, business has got to fund um, everything in society. So I also find that if you look at how fast things are moving from a technology standpoint today in the world, Europe is quickly being left behind. And so, innovation, that ecosystem, the working relationship between business and universities, the educational system with governments, that whole ecosystem is, in my opinion, failing in Europe. And I think that's an area that really needs to be looked at. Right? How do you get this cranked up again and going to where innovation becomes something that's at the core of the EU model? And that seems to be lacking, in my opinion.
What do you think that leaders are not thinking about enough that they should be thinking about?
The future. So clearly, and you've got to have look. It's very easy to step back and blame circumstances. I don't think there's enough ownership. I don't think there's enough initiative today with a lot. Not this is a generalization. There's a lot of businesses in the UK that are doing really well and that have great leadership, that are innovative, and that are quite impressive organizations. Some of the best in the world. And so, I don't like generalities, and then here I am making a general statement. I think, you know, blaming the market, blaming the situation, sitting back and just saying, okay, we'll wait till things improve is not a solution. Being front footed, being proactive, showing initiative, saying, hey, look, things are tough, but, there's still opportunity. And finding that little ray of sunshine in a dark world is often challenging, but doable. And that's what's missing is, people stop believing in, a better way of doing things. People stop believing that things are going to get better and they become pessimistic and negative. And that's kind of what we started talking about, Josh, in the beginning. So how do you build back that optimism? And at the same time, not have false hope, but actually deliver results. Right? There's so much potential. The European market is still a massive market. There's opportunity, and there are ways to make things better. One thing that I always found strange about people within the United Kingdom was the transit system. People always complain about trains, and I have a great appreciation for British Transit. I know this is a foreign concept, right? Like where I am, I got to get in the car to go anywhere. So
Hmm.
I'm not even sure it's safe to take a train. I don't know what the statistics are on derailments here, but I found the system. People complain if the train's 5 minutes late in the UK. I'm like, hey, at least there
Yeah.
was one, and the underground, the bus system. Now, I was always fearful before I moved there to take public transit in the UK because I didn't know how to do it. I always thought I was going to get lost. And um, I have to, when I moved into London and we got rid of our vehicles, and I didn't have one the last 6 years or so that I was there. And I really have an appreciation for that. But I think there's so many things there. Obviously, transit can still be improved, of course, but there's so many positives about Europe, about the UK in particular. The digital talent in the United Kingdom, I think, is much stronger than many parts of the US. I think has some just absolutely phenomenal people, and I think that people probably there's a confidence issue, and
Hmm.
I think that needs to be addressed. it's up to leadership to do that.
Mm. And again, going back to leadership, how can we find the right leaders? Because from when I'm listening to you and when I'm thinking is that there is in my mind I'm thinking, is there a kind of collective psychology in particularly Europe, but I think in other parts of the world as well, that has become quite pessimistic, has lost maybe the drive to get things done and perhaps wait for things to happen. And I'm thinking, is that something that is that something that covers all leaders, or actually are we getting the wrong leaders? Are those people there sitting in organizations who are bold, who are risk taking, who are optimistic, entrepreneurial, but for some reason they're not getting to the top of organizations?
I think there's a lot of that, Josh. I'm going to say this was maybe June of 2015. I was in Corby at the Best Western Hotel. I was a gentleman named Chris Page with our product organization, 300 people in a large ballroom, if you will. It was we were it was the first time I had met this team, and Chris and I were up on stage, and it was somewhat informal, which I prefer. And I asked the question of the audience. I said, "Do you feel encouraged to take risk?" And they said, "No, we don't." And Chris, rightfully so, asked a follow-up question to the team. He said, "Well, do you feel discouraged to take risk?" And they said, "No." So they weren't encouraged to take risks. They weren't discouraged to take risks. They never thought about risks. They just went about their job every day. And they had for years. So it was just this cap path of the mind. We're going to do things the way we've always done it. But yet, here's what I realized. And it dawned on me in that conversation as I went into the office the next day and I walked around the building and I started sitting down at people's desks and interfacing with people, which, by the way, I caught a lot of hell for, because I was told the next day that wasn't done in the UK because there was a hierarchy, and I was picking off a lot of managers, which I quickly responded that that was pretty much the way it was going to be, and never to bring that up to me again. But the reality was, as I went out and I met people, Josh, within the business, I realized, you know what? We don't have a problem with the people in this organization. We have a problem with the leadership. And I realized just in the UK, the 2,000 people that we had some incredible talent. The company was performing at a very average level, but the people were not average, which is what I expected to see. Because you think of the performance as average, the team's going to be average, but we had definitely an above average talent for the organization and for the performance. But yeah, it was the leadership that was an issue. So I agree with what you said. I think there's a tremendous amount of talent and potential within the United Kingdom that can and needs to be unleashed. And I think there's some brilliant people that yet, do they know what good looks like in terms of leadership? Like who would be their role models, and who are they looking to? Is it somebody that really just talks a lot, but they don't demonstrate, and they just use examples of things that are theoretical, etc. Or do they roll up their sleeves and say, "Hey, come with me, go to this customer, right? Let me show you how to do this. Let's walk through the warehouse, and I'll tell you, and I'll teach you how to point things out, and I'll teach you how to coach others, and I'll teach you how to be successful. And hey, what are your ideas on the business?" And give people that confidence to begin to make decisions. So, I think that's the issue in the UK, is that there's not enough good examples of what leadership looks like. And you say, well, why? And the leaders maybe that have that potential, are they going to stay there? Or are they going to move elsewhere where they can make more money? So is the return, is the reward, is the incentive system the right system in business? And you start to question all of these things. And to me, ultimately, you get back to the educational system, because you want to build your own leaders at an early age. And so it's how you set up the whole system of leadership. I was always surprised in the UK that there weren't sports scholarships in
Mm.
university. And you look at how big college sports are, say, the United States, and I know this is true in Europe as well. But you look at the UK, you think Oxford. Well, why isn't there a football team in Oxford? Maybe there is, but one that's scholarship based that you have, or Cambridge, where you have 60, 70,000 people that go and watch college sports. I think that would be pretty amazing to see something like that
Mm.
with rugby as well, with as much passion as there is in the UK for sport, right? To see that at an early age, and I bring that up only because of the leadership opportunities you have on teams, right, in university and in school, right? How do you get them into competitive environments? So that's just one idea and one thought, one question I had why that didn't
Mm.
exist. And it's fun to go watch the Henley Regatta and see the rowing competitions, etc. And see Cambridge, Oxford, and the competitions. Fun to watch, but it'd be great to see it across the board in sport competition.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree, and that's very true. It's not something I've really thought about very much, but why do we not have something like that? I guess that's my final question, and that's there will be people listening to this, or people that admire you, who will be thinking, I want to be like Lindsley Ruth. I want to try and distill the components of him, his personality, his attitude, what he did, which has enabled him to get to the top of business. What is it within you that has taken you to the top of your career?
So I first of all, I've always had a relentless pursuit of excellence. So it's not a win at all cost by any means. So just to be clear, so I think you got to be balanced in terms of your decisions and what you do. But for me, it simply goes back to knowing what good looks like, and to having a real, you know, strategic assessment of what's required to really understand the business, understand the direction you're going in. But I would say, first of all, you got to know what good looks like. Secondly, you got to hire A players. You got to get the team right, right, and then you got to give them direction, help with execution, but ultimately give them the freedom and the ability to go execute. We hire leaders to lead, right? Not just to come manage things, et cetera. So I think having a plan overall, and staying true to that plan in your life, determining what you're willing to sacrifice. So getting to the top of an organization always requires sacrifice. It doesn't happen by luck, right? And so you have to be willing to make sacrifices. It's not for everyone. The people tend to look from the outside in and think, oh, you just went to Japan, or you went to Korea, or you went to Bordeaux, or you were in Munich, or wherever, you were in Peru. People look at that and think it's all glorious, et cetera. What they don't realize is you're there, you're jet lagged, you're working nonstop, and you're not spending the weekend there. Or if you do, it's to adjust to the time zone, and you get in late on a Saturday night or something when you arrive. So it's not that glamorous. So you got to be willing to accept the sacrifices that are required to lead a global business. And you oftentimes you can't commit to being there for the your child's birthday party because maybe there's a board session or something. And so there's a lot of sacrifice that comes with that. You got to be prepared for that. And then the last but not most important aspect is you got to be able to execute. So you've got to be able to execute. You got to stay focused on what the priorities are, and you got to deliver on performance. So it's not, at times, you might think that's what you want to do. But when you get into it, you might say, I'm not willing to put in the time and the effort it takes to do that. And that's okay. So there are sacrifices that go along with it.
Mm. Thank you so much, Lindsley. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak. Thank you for listening to Air Supply from JO Collective. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, you can leave a review, preferably a positive one. And see you soon. Thank you.